This episode of The Clear Out was recorded on the 23rd of August 2023 at home in Wicklow, and it is an episode that is focused on the idea of nudity, nakedness, both literally, the physical body, but also emotionally, psychologically, and what being naked means to the individual, what it means in the context of a relationship, a friendship. And I just go on a bit of a journey, and I may be covering ground I've covered before, but I talk about my relationship with my own body. I talk about a little vanity project, a vanity goal I have for my next birthday. I talk about how my attitude to my body got contextualized in terms of my relationships and sex. I talk about nudity in other contexts, and I have other things to say as well. Some personal, some more general, but ultimately it's all about coming back to a positive sense of self, both physically, emotionally, psychologically, I should say. And I reveal that the starting point for this conversation came from a strange place, and that was listening to a U2 album, their current album, and just hearing vulnerability in Bono's singing voice. And that just got me going on this track of what it means to be stripped back and naked and vulnerable. And I thought it was worth exploring. So you'll find out, and you can decide if I've done that successfully or not. It's coming up right around the corner, and I will see you there. Cheers.
Ooh, not gonna change my mind, leaving the dream behind, keep my mojo in.
Hi, my name is Dara Clear, and you're listening to The Clear Out. You're very welcome. I hope this finds you in a good moment. Now let me ask you this. Are you clothed, or are you au naturel? Because this is going to be germane to the topic of today's podcast, which I will get to in due course. But I realised the other day, yesterday in fact, I just had a moment of like, oh, that just planted a seed for this week's episode. And the theme is going to be nudity, or being naked. And I think that has been a consistent theme of the podcast, although I've never expressed it as such. But the mode that I have embraced from episode 1 is to leave myself exposed and to embrace being exposed. And I hope it has never sounded in any way narcissistic or egocentric or vain, but rather has been tethered to something that feels open and honest and at times vulnerable, but always in the interest of exploring well-being, exploring the aforementioned vulnerability, being honest about my own struggles, my own failings, my own neuroses, anxieties, my own areas of personal sort of questing, for want of a better phrase, in the belief that my exploration of that territory is of use and is of benefit to anyone who might find themselves skirting similar areas of inquiry or similar areas of inquisition, self-doubt, Anyone who's willing to open those doors to the unknown or the unresolved, and anyone who's willing to put their hand up and go, do you know what, I don't have all the answers. And it's frustrating at times. It's frustrating not to have answers. It's frustrating not to be able to put a nice bow on things and go, that's great, that's done. I can pack that away now, not have to think about it again. I find this is very much akin to the Nietzschean idea of eternal recurrence. I find myself face to face with my SH1T, to quote my daughter, instead of saying shit. I find myself face to face with my stuff again and again, and sometimes that is an intense repetition. It's an intense face-off with my own crap, and I shouldn't use words like shit and crap. Because that diminishes the impact and the import of that wrestle. But that is an inclination that I sometimes have. I think that many of us have, and the inclination is to euphemize our struggles, to euphemize our issues, and to euphemize the demons that dwell within. And it's a way of deflecting, and it is a way to diminish and make light of them, and it's a way to leave other people untroubled because we're all so considerate. And that's appropriate. That is actually appropriate a lot of the time. You choose your moment to unburden yourself. And contrary to the impression you might be getting from this intro, I don't unburden myself every single episode on the Clear Out. Sometimes I don't talk about myself at all. Maybe if you're a regular listener, you might go, hold on a second, I'm not sure if that's entirely true. It may not be entirely true. Sometimes an episode is very consciously me exploring something that I'm currently concerned with, or something that has been occupying a lot of bandwidth in my brain. But look, that is fundamentally what I do here on the podcast. It's an ongoing voyage of, I don't want to say discovery, but it's an ongoing voyage of exploration and reflection and re-examination. And I don't mind that. I think I have a lot of belief in that as a valuable way to go about our business, and to go about the business of life, and to go about the business of living with ourselves. The constant reevaluation that's not rooted in neuroses, that's not rooted in insecurity. Quite the contrary. A reevaluation and a re-examination and a reassessment that's rooted in confidence that it's okay to feel unresolved. It's okay to feel agitated, bothered, and upset at times with a sense of things aren't going well. And if we can embrace the idea of, I can look at this with a certain level of confidence and trust that it's not going to undo me, that it's not going to leave me helpless to go on, that I can face my own stuff and come up with a better understanding than I had before I looked with real honesty, before I looked with a really frank gaze, at myself, at oneself, at your stuff, And there are definitely times in our lives when we simply can't go there. We simply do not have it in us to deal with our crap, to deal with our issues, to deal with the feeling of, oh man, am I here again? Have I still not managed to escape myself? Sorry, I mean that's my frame. So that may not you may not relate to that, but I do believe that is the ongoing challenge. I mean, Sartre said hell is other people, but sometimes hell is yourself, and certainly that's my experience of dealing with my own patterns and my own cycles and my own sort of embedded responses and reactions. And there are times when there's an accumulation of a pattern that I don't love, what I would consider a negative pattern, or a pattern that indulges too many responses that I consider far from optimal, and indulges responses that allow me to sort of wallow and give in, and embrace a sort of defeatist apathy, which is a particularly disappointing form of resignation. And I don't want it, but sometimes that's all I can muster. And I try to keep it balanced. And not get too down on myself. But I must say, and I mean, if you're a regular listener to the show, or to the tell, as I like to call it, if you're a regular listener, you've probably picked up on a bit of a trend running over the last few months, maybe the last 2 or 3 months. I feel I've been, and I mean, I have spoken about this very unambiguously. I feel I have been dealing with something I haven't been able to put my finger on, and that has been a bit of a recurring theme, and that's purely personal. That's my own stuff. It's my own internal battle, and there has been a sort of a frequency of that dynamic, that I have to put my hand up and say I found it. I'm finding it challenging, and I was laughing earlier today. I left a message with a friend. We were having a bit of a back and forth, and I was laughing and saying, "Look, this because I'm turning 50 at the start of next year, so that's there in the not too distant future." And I was laughing with a friend, saying, "Look, I can't afford a midlife crisis." If that's what this is, and I don't think it is, in all seriousness, but I can't afford to go out and buy a sports car. I can't afford to leave my wife and pick up some inappropriately youthful younger model. I'm not interested. That's not where my desperation lies. But as I say, I'm in no position to start. I don't know, to start ticking those boxes and start wearing clothes that belong to younger men. I tell you what, I mentioned vanity earlier. From a vanity point of view, I would like to be in good shape for my 50th. That's it. That's my single vanity goal. I'd like to be in better shape than I am by my 50th birthday. Just to go, look, I'm 50 and I'm in good shape. Now, I think objectively, and again, I'm not bragging here, but I'm not in bad shape. but I could probably afford. I mean, I'd like to tone up a bit more, and that is unapologetically vain. I just go, I want to look good for my 50th, and then I'd be very happy to maintain that. But it's a bit like, sometimes it's a bit like me thinking to myself, I'd like to look cool, and then there's a big part of me that just goes, I can't be arsed. I just can't be bothered. For feck's sake, I'll just wear the same old crap that I always wear. That is, yeah. I'm under no illusions. Gone are the days, if there ever were any days, when I looked cool. I think whatever that gene is, I've never really had it, and I could refer you to an early episode of the podcast, which I occasionally bring this up, the infamous summer of '90, when I was listening to Salt and Pepper and Madonna. I think Like a Prayer, that album was out that year, wasn't it? I was listening to Nena Cherry's Roll Like Sushi. I was listening to Bobby Brown, and I was also taping loads of records from the house I was staying in the summer of '90 in Michigan, in Grass Lake in Michigan. And my hosts had a fantastic record collection, and so I was recording tapes of the Beatles and the Stones and the Eagles, early Eagles stuff, and the Mills Brothers, which my host assured me, when I was 16, he assured me this is great music for making love. And he didn't use that particular phrase. It was a bit coarser than that. The Mills Brothers, a group of African American singers, like us 4 or 5 guys singing these dulcet harmonies. I used to listen to that album a lot. Anyway, look, grand. So yes, where to begin? I mean, that was the beginning, and there, as I say, there's this idea of being naked, of being nude. I mean, do we hear those words the same way? He was naked. He was nude. It's a very particular thing. But I suppose what I found myself just having this moment yesterday and equating nudity and nakedness, not simply with the physical form of the human body, which can be endlessly objectified, which can be endlessly made the subject of art. And you think of whatever classical nudes, you may think of models, you may think of movies and how the naked form is presented in movies. You may just you may think of yourself, your own relationship to your body. We may think of sort of the toxic aspect of the hypersexualization of the human form, the hypersexualization of the female form in particular. That maybe in our thoughts, in our frame, we may be thinking of the sort of the deluge of pornography and the kind of pornification of bodies, and again female bodies in particular, I would argue. But we may not think of the naked body in terms of vulnerability, in terms of frailty, in terms of being exposed and the implied sort of vulnerability and weakness, perhaps. I mean, weakness is not really the right word, but our weak spots being exposed, a certain defenselessness in being naked. And I'll tell you the thing that made me think about this. This is funny. I think it's funny. I bought a copy of U2's latest album yesterday, which is this Songs of Surrender, it's called. It's just released a month or two ago, maybe a bit more. And basically, the way I think of it, having listened to a little bit about it before hearing it, it's sort of a pet project within the band. It was something The Edge, it seems, something he wanted to do, to look at the back catalogue of the band and go, can I redo these? Can we redo them? Can we strip them back and make them really bare, and hear them in a very different way, without some of those distinctive U2 sounds. And so I put it on. I was with my daughter yesterday, and I put it on in the car. And I think I'll have to go back and look at it. I think the first song is One, and then the next one is Where the Streets Have No Name. And what was really striking was listening to Bono's voice and just hearing it without that kind of big sound that the band can make. And if you know the original versions of those songs, or if you've heard them perform those songs live, just to hear the vocal by itself almost and go, oh right, yeah, there's Bono, little old Bono. God bless him, little old Bono and his voice. And that was my instant reaction, was, oh right, yeah, he sounds quite vulnerable. There's a vulnerability here in just hearing the voice, without the Edge's distinctive electric guitar sound, without Larry Mullen's kind of martial drumming, which is these are such key aspects of the U2 sound. Without Adam Clayton's bass line, and yeah, it was really, really interesting. And I've only listened to the album once, and I know I'm gonna go back to it and give it a real proper listen. I'll have it in the car now, so that'll be the way I'll be able to do it. But it just got me thinking about this idea then of being naked, without the defenses that we normally use, without the support of certain, without the support of certain poses, without the support of certain guises, without the support of certain personas, these sort of protective structures that we put in place to keep ourselves safe. And I just think that there's huge strength and huge power to be had from cultivating a level of comfort with being naked. And yeah, that can be a physical thing. I think I've spoken about this on a previous episode of the pod. I did an episode about sort of objectification and female objectification particularly, but spoke about my own relationship with my body. And I certainly remember as a young guy and going into my first sort of sexual relationships, I would have felt self-conscious enough about my body, and I certainly would have had certain parts of my body that I was like, not crazy about them or that. And ultimately, I mean, it's very simplistic, really. I suppose on one level, as a boy or as a teenager, adolescent, you're doing that sort of just a physical comparison with other young guys, your peers, or other guys you see around, and go, well, how do I compare to him? What's my body like compared to him? Do I match up? Am I better? Am I worse? Am I smaller? Am I skinnier? And I mean, that would have always been my thing, because myself, my brothers, we were always kind of naturally sort of slim guys. We're not big. We would have struggled to put weight on. So I was never kind of concerned in that area. I never gave that area much thought at all. In terms of am I too big or am I overweight? That's never had to be a feature of my thinking. I mean, maybe until relatively recently, from my sort of mid-40s on, I've seen a sort of a change in my body, and certainly it's been more difficult to stay lean, which is why, as I said earlier, I'd quite like to tone up a bit more for for my 50th. That's my single goal. I don't really have any other goal. Maybe one other goal, but not in the area of physical appearance. But yeah, I mean, again, if we're I'm not talking about being attractive. To just go back to this area of as I was getting older and growing up, I'm still kind of thinking, okay, this is the body I have. How do I compare it to my pals when we see each other in our underwear or swimming, or we're staying the night at each other's houses or whatever? And there'd be a lot of sort of, very open sort of examination of bodies is my memory. Myself, my male friends, just flex the muscles. Who looks like they're bigger, who looks like they're stronger. What's the chest like, what's the stomach like, and a bit of gentle teasing, but often quite supportive of each other is my memory in different friend groups that I had. And then sort of it goes into two frames. Like, one frame is, will I be able to defend myself, protect myself if I find myself in a fight? Do I give off some sort of energy that means I'm less likely to be a target, or more likely to be a target of guys who might want to attack me? Could I handle taking on those guys in the town, in the school, who are tough and pretty uncompromising when it comes to fighting and whatnot? And that's one frame. And I suppose you could also put the sports frame beside that. Am I a good competitor? Can I outrun this guy? I didn't do sort of team sports growing up. It wasn't my bag. I was always attracted to the kind of solo pursuits. And that's largely stayed with me, apart from a very I've had a good relationship with football, AstroTurf football, soccer, the round ball game, as they call it in Australia, for quite a few years now. I had a bit of a hiatus in Australia, but I'm back playing regularly, which is a great source of enjoyment. But yeah, back to the idea of the body. You put it into those frames, the kind of male peer competitive frame, the how do I measure up frame with my peers, and then you go to who am I attracted to? And in my case, being straight, I was attracted to girls. How do girls see me? Am I attractive to them? I know I want to be. And, you're kind of tentatively putting yourself out there. And I mean, there was no nudity for a long time. But I was about to say earlier, as I entered into my first sexual relationships, once I got to sort of university age, I think my interest in the female body and my interest in the, my sexual partners and enjoying sex, I think that trumped any concern I had about my physical appearance. I was interested in I was interested just in the experience, in the exchange, in learning, in giving pleasure, receiving pleasure, and that was the motivator. And I found myself in relationships very quickly. Not all of my friends, my male friends, very few of them were going into long-term relationships at such a young age, but I just seemed to roll into them very naturally and enjoy the security of a monogamous relationship. And I think really those relationships, my first kind of sexual relationships, were where I kind of stopped looking at myself in a way, and just kind of trusted that I was with a safe person, that I was with a safe sexual partner, and in a relationship with someone that I was interested in, where there was, again, my memories of my relationships, where there was plenty of just mutual respect and healthy mutual interest. I'm not saying that these were perfect relationships. They were very immature in a lot of ways, but I kind of brought that attitude to my body with me into all my relationships. I was never, I wasn't particularly self-conscious from from a fairly young age. I just kind of was like, oh, just get on with it. What can this body do? Was my focus, rather than what does this body look like. And that's largely continued to be my attitude to my own body. And I'm take that any way you like. I feel I'm lucky that I have that relationship with my body. And I think context is huge here. I think context is just huge. And if you can bear to listen just for another moment or two, if I stay in the area of relationships and the context of relationships and sex and relating to someone that way, I think I just had a lot of trust. I just had a lot of trust that I was being regarded, if not favourably, at least in a forgiving way. So I think I was bringing a healthy amount of humility to proceedings, and just trusting that things would be okay. And if I'd managed to persuade or convince or secure the affection of my girlfriend at the time, or my partner at the time, I just trusted that. And went, okay, well, this is okay. That's all the approval I need, and let's proceed from here. And I guess I was pretty lucky in my partners historically, that no one was mean. Because, you hear stories. And I mean, I've heard stories from my girlfriends, from my ex-girlfriends, from my wife, of how they were made to feel in a negative way, like how they were made to feel bad about their bodies from comments from previous partners, ex-boyfriends, whatever. And I know male friends of mine that have had negative experiences, with their partners, historically. And again, it's a bullet I dodged, and I'm very grateful to have done so, because of course there's huge vulnerability. There's huge vulnerability in that area, and there's there's vulnerability in sex, in my opinion. I mean, I'm not into into bondage or being is a male dominant, is that a dominatrix as well, or is that just a female title? I'm not sure. But you have the idea of being a dominant and being a submissive in bondage. That's never been my bag. But I think there is vulnerability in that specific area. You can hear me faltering here. I didn't realize I was going to go down this road. That wasn't really my intention. But anyway, look, it is what it is. And that I go back to what I said moments ago about the idea of context. So nudity has a context, and my experience growing up and seeing my parents naked, bath times and whatnot, there seemed to be a fairly relaxed attitude to nudity. I've certainly continued that as a parent myself, but I also, I have a long history as well, and it's not, my wife would probably roll her eyes and just call me an exhibitionist, but I think I've always had a sort of an impulse, if there's an opportunity for the comic impact of nudity, I've always been alive to that possibility. And last week, for example, beautiful sunny day, I picked my daughter up from a play date. I was coming home after work, and I said to her, my goodness, what a beautiful afternoon. This is just it's a great afternoon, I think, for running naked in the garden. And I could see my daughter sort of looking at me sideways from the passenger seat, going, oh yeah. And I was just kind of playing with that idea and sort of teasing her. And ultimately, we got home, and she was, it kind of became a dare. She said, you wouldn't do that. And I said, do you think I wouldn't? She said, I dare you. And so yeah, I did. I stripped off and ran around the garden naked, which my daughter thought was absolutely hilarious. And she was frantically reaching for the water pistol. But yeah, I don't know. I was following an impulse, and I don't know if later in life, if my daughter will go, holy hell, what was that? I again, trust. I trusted the moment, and I went with it, and that was grand. But yeah, it's context is the thing, and I was thinking about it earlier. Just this idea of what do we think of? Like, what do we think of when we think of being of nude and naked? Those words, and I was asking myself that question, and I got images in my head from classical art. I was thinking of The Birth of Venus by Botticelli. I was thinking of Michelangelo's David. I was thinking of various classical iterations of Adam and Eve, maybe Klimt, maybe Egon Schiele, some of these great artists. And and then you accelerate into, you know, moving image, and you accelerate into movies, and you think of the, you know, the naked body, and the female form, of course, features so much more heavily than the male form in movies, and it still seems to be a taboo in certainly in American movies. It seems to be a taboo to show full frontal male nudity. So there's been a kind of a disproportionate kind of fetishization and objectification of the female body. But again, there's context. So when we see naked bodies in movies, there's a context. And I was speaking last week about Jennifer Lawrence in No Hard Feelings. I mean, she has a nude scene in No Hard Feelings that's played purely for comedy, and it's very effective, and it works in the context of the scene. It works, and it's not sexualized at all, in fact. So it doesn't feel like the camera's, you know, leering at her or lingering over her form. But if you take another Jennifer Lawrence movie, which I spoke about maybe a year ago, I was talking about what feminists and what feminism looks like in movies. In the thriller Red Sparrow, she has a few nude scenes, and one of them is just very frank, very kind of cold setup and cold kind of palette, and it's just about her power and her defiance and her aggression, and it's in the context of the story. It's a moment of her confronting a fellow spy in training, these so-called sparrows, who are trained in the arts of seduction as a key sort of weapon in their arsenal of espionage, and taking down enemy agents or enemy subjects. So so that they're very different contexts. You think of, I don't know, maybe Sharon Stone in Basic Instinct, and the infamous interrogation scene where there is, for the briefest of moments, a glimpse of her naked crotch while she's been interrogated in a room of sweaty cops. And she, the story goes, Paul Verhoeven, the director, didn't tell her he was going to shoot her from that angle. And again, you have to, well, I think I'd take a dim view of that. But Sharon Stone, like, when she saw the first cut, apparently she slapped Verhoeven in the face. She was so angry with him, but subsequently decided to allow it stay in the movie, because in the context of the movie it seemed to be appropriate for her character, who, again, very sexually aggressive, this sort of femme fatale. And it's actually, I mean, look, again, whatever you think of the movie, it works really well in its own terms. Sort of the definitive erotic thriller. And Sharon Stone's great. I mean, I think Sharon Stone's a really good actress, and she's great in that. But nudity, again, I'm not going to sit here and just go through a list of Hollywood actresses, when they've stripped off, and the nature of each scene. But that's a very particular context. When we see nudity in films, it's a very particular context, and the question to ask ourselves is, what's the object here? What's the function of this nudity? What's the purpose of this nudity? What's it trying to do for us? What's it doing for the plot? Or do we have a sense of this just being gratuitous? Do we have a sense of this just being something purely for the director's pleasure? Is it just a very indulgent, yes, male gaze? And I mean, I could refer you to Stanley Kubrick's Eyes Wide Shut, which I rewatched recently. My memory of Eyes Wide Shut was I enjoyed it. I enjoyed Sidney Pollack's performance. I enjoyed Tom Cruise's performance when I first saw it, which is like whatever, it came out in 99, I think. I felt I had great empathy for Tom Cruise's agonized husband who finds out that his wife has had fantasies about a naval officer, and it's, you know, threatening the stability of their marriage. And he goes off on this night of sort of reckless abandon and ends up in this kind of Jeffrey Epstein style orgy for rich people. And I remember at the time there was a mixed response to it. My wife, she's kind of pretty scathing about Stanley Kubrick, and it might be just on the basis of Eyes Wide Shut. I like Stanley Kubrick's movies. I think, I don't think there's much of an argument that would deny him his status as one of the all-time greats. But Eyes Wide Shut, there's just sort of an endless array of naked female bodies in different contexts, and I just found myself kind of going, I don't know, I wasn't that engaged, and I didn't, this recent time of watching it, I didn't really enjoy the acting. I particularly didn't really enjoy Tom Cruise's performance. I thought Nicole Kidman was interesting. Just her sort of intelligence and her very kind of sensual, sexual quality as an actress. She had a real sort of vitality and vibrancy, I think, when she was a younger actress. Something I think she's lost in recent years. Maybe not just recent years. There's something just I found in her performances or her acting, maybe in the latter part of her career, just a little bit too cold and a little bit too held. She seemed freer as an actress when she was younger, and there was a bit more abandon, and I don't know, something unpredictable in her performances, which I really liked. Something fierier. Maybe that was just youth. I don't know. But yeah, so to return to the idea then of context and nudity in context, you have my hilarious jape running nude in the garden. I mean, it's just absurd and silly and stupid, and yeah, I should just be laughed at. That was the object. I know there's a friend of my wife's who, anytime the Jehovah's Witnesses came to the door, and this guy is a devout Christian, he'd strip off and open the door naked and go, yeah, come on in, tell me all about it, and they'd turn away and go, that's okay, we'll come back another time when it's more convenient. But I don't know, I mentioned last week or the week before, I've been listening to this podcast, a narrative podcast on the big picture. The Big Picture is the name of the podcast, and they're doing a series at the moment on Vietnam, the Vietnam War as told through American movies, and looking at it through this sort of through various lenses, but like, an imperialist American lens, this sort of countercultural lens, the kind of, wake up to the reality of the war lens, a very jingoistic 80s lens, lots of different lenses, and the My Lai massacre, or there's that famous image of the Vietnamese child, crying and walking naked down a Vietnamese road after a napalm attack, I think. Is that the correct context? But there you've got nudity again, and it's chilling and disturbing, and it's kind of like a universal image of the sort of barbarity war and the innocence of so many victims, and again, it provides a context that makes us reflect on, well, what is this thing? What is it to be naked? And if we can only associate nudity with sex or with objectification in a very sort of prurient way, it's a failure of the imagination. And I suppose that would be an area of concern for maybe how young men today, with this kind of saturation, like they're kind of drowning in porn. And I think there's definitely a trap there in terms of they can only see women in that context. And then again, I'm not trying to throw any shade on sex workers or porn stars, porn performers, but I guess sometimes those bodies are massively augmented through cosmetic surgery and whatnot, and that creates its own issue, its own problem, in terms of like what does a body look like? What's a real body? What's an authentic body? And just before pressing record tonight, I was looking at various images online, some of that art I mentioned, and I noticed there was an article in the magazine Women's Health, and it was like 40 celebrities, female celebrities, pose nude in the name of body positivity. And it was striking to me. And okay, I had to remind myself, this is Women's Health, it's a women's health magazine, but all of the women had very conventionally healthy bodies, like very conventionally shaped, formed bodies. A lot of them were athletes, personal trainers. There was one woman who was larger, and that she was the only one out of 40. And in fact, there was more than 40, because one of those images was, I think, 4 or 5 members of the England women's rugby team. And I was looking at them and going, wow, I wish I had a body like theirs. One of the women was particularly, strong and muscular looking. But yeah, 39 out of the 40 photos, it was women in really good shape, mostly in their 30s, and I think the oldest one there was maybe 45. But and also, I don't know, about Photoshop, but every body looked really sort of, had an amazing sort of sheen and tone and complexion. And I was like, well, this is, aesthetically, these bodies look amazing. But how real are they in terms of this idea of, body positivity and real bodies? And would those... And again, I'm not throwing shade on the women who chose to participate. They are, they're naked. So that, that is its own challenge. It's its own achievement, and its own risk. But sometimes photography, of course, what you can do now with photography and how you can make someone look better. It's... Again, it's cultivating something in our collective gaze, in what we see, and it plays with our expectations and it plays with our perceptions. And I think we have to ask ourselves, and I certainly feel, I don't know how often I see authentic bodies in the media. Not really. And it's not that I'm seeking them out. Maybe now that I'm talking about it, I'll go and seek them out. But it's, it's funny. I was doing that show at the start of the year, the show Manifest with Broken Talkers Theatre Company, and I end up half naked in that show. I mean, there's a partial, moment of partial nudity, not full nudity. We were in our underwear, but I think 3 of us in the cast stripped down to our jocks, our underwear, to change from one costume to another. But I ended up in the show just in my karate bottoms, my karate pants, and I know my friend, Phelim Cannon, who's in the show, but also co-artistic director of Broken Talkers with Gary Keegan, and it was in rehearsals that I was like that at one point, and he said, "Oh, would you mind, would you do that in the show? Because you just, his words, not mine, but you just look like a man." Then you kind of go, "Yeah, duh, of course." But that's, I just took that as, something that was very affirmative, and certainly in service of the show and in service of what we're trying to represent. I could see the function of that. I could see how that just made sense. So again, a context, and not me trying to be all buff. Like, I didn't suddenly hit the gym. I don't ever hit a gym. I mean, I've basically never hit a gym in my life. So anything that I have going on physically, it's just from, the chosen sports or forms of exercise that I have done and do. But yeah, I'm not sure where that was going. Authentic bodies. So I have an authentic body, and I don't know ultimately where I kind of wanted to go with this, without trying to sort of further explore, any number of other contexts. I worked in a hospital for 2 years as well, so I saw a lot of different bodies, as in my role as a theatre technician, in a hospital in Melbourne where I worked for 2 years, and over 2 years, I don't think I ever saw what you would call a perfect body. So, what do you make of that? And there were a huge range of bodies, adult bodies, and again, in the context of medical procedures, nudity was not unusual, nothing nothing inappropriate, but yeah, you see the human form and you go, yeah, bodies are all shapes and sizes. You talk about vulnerability. That's a context for vulnerability, going under the knife for whatever procedure it might be. And that is, that is something that, the mode of, behavior, the mode of care is extremely sensitive, thankfully, because people are extremely vulnerable in that context, and everybody has has a role to play there in being respectful of what's happening, and ensuring that the most vulnerable person in the room, i.e. the patient, feels as safe and secure as possible, regardless of age or gender or whatever. But to bring it back to the more figurative idea of nudity, the more figurative idea of being naked, I believe very strongly that being able to regard ourselves nakedly, and maybe even more so, and this is of course going into the area of relationships, but this can be romantic relationships, it can be friendships, whatever, but to be able to be truly naked in front of another person, I think it's a great act of courage. I think it's a great act of trust. And if you want to think of it this way, you're sort of honouring another person by either presenting yourself to them naked. You're honouring the strength of your friendship, your love, and similarly, you're honouring them by giving them the space to be naked in front of you. And I'm speaking figuratively here. I'm not speaking literally. And, I've kind of covered that terrain. And I feel that way about that in a romantic sense as well. To give someone the space to be naked in front of you physically. I mean, I think that was a great thrill to me as a young man going into those, early relationships I spoke about. And, the trust and excitement of that. And the fun of that. Not just the area of sexual desire and satisfaction or gratification, but to come back to the figurative idea, to go, this is how I am, this is who I am right now. That in a way is far more courageous, and it's a much higher level of vulnerability, or it can be, for many people, I'm sure. And I'd certainly say, again, in the spirit of what I try to do here on the podcast, I've alluded to various times, and sometimes I've spoken a bit more explicitly about it. But again, after however long I've been, with my wife, 22 years, 23 years, what I've alluded to is, this hasn't been the easiest time in our relationship for various reasons, and kind of accumulative reasons over some time. And it becomes very difficult. It becomes very difficult to be truly open and truly vulnerable with someone when there's conflict, and that that comes at a cost. There's a price to that, and there's a loss of trust, and there's a loss of trust on an individual level. You don't trust yourself to be fully open because you don't trust that you're going to get the response you hope. You hope will be there, or you don't trust that the space is going to be receptive, and it goes both ways, because as you cover yourself up, and again, figuratively speaking, as you cover yourself up, you're not giving as much of yourself, and so the other person is aware of that as well, and so there's a gradual covering up, and that breakdown of trust means there's less openness, there's less vulnerability. And this is something I learned years ago, or felt I instinctively, well, not instinctively, I sort of came to the understanding that when we cover ourselves up and when we have barriers up, it's it forbids the transmission of love, it forbids the transmission of energy. You can't send something out, but nor can you receive something. And it's been my conviction over the years that for a relationship to truly thrive, the barriers have to come down. And if I bring it back to the individual experience and our relationship with ourselves, my relationship with myself, I think we're very good at putting up barriers. We're very good at putting up barriers and creating little kind of blind spots. We build little walls and go, I don't really want to look at that. So I'm just going to build that wall, which means I'm just going to turn my gaze this way, or I'm going to turn my gaze that way. And then, that's grand. I don't have to deal with that now. And it's habitual. It's very much in the service of self-preservation. It's very much in the service of staying in a comfortable place. And it's ultimately, I think ultimately it becomes a disservice to ourselves because it facilitates a certain amount of denial, it facilitates a certain amount of delusion, and I think on a temporary basis, I don't have a problem with that. I think it's necessary sometimes to just sort of bide our time and go, I'm not really ready to deal with that. I just can't quite handle it. And I think you can own that position, which is healthy. Not only is it healthy, I think it's important to go, I just don't have it. I don't have it at the moment. I can't face that fight. It's too much, and my resources are too few. And I think that's good decision making. Sorry, I'm laughing at myself because I'm hitting my daughter with this concept at the moment. Good decision making, and she's hilarious. She just rolls her eyes and go, "Oh no, is this going to be another speech? Are you going to be talking for a long time?" Or I'll get to the end of my little lecture, and she'll go, "I stopped listening, and I don't know what you were talking about." She's brilliant, and I'm very lucky to have her in my life. There's a nakedness to her truth, which is, which is very refreshing. But yeah, I think that sort of nakedness that I was talking about before, which I think is fundamentally, it's emotional, and maybe it's intellectual as well. Maybe it's psychological and it's emotional, and it's a lot of work. It takes a lot of work and a lot of courage, and a sort of a deep trust in ourselves that we can handle it, that we can handle that examination of ourselves. That's how I feel about it anyway. Yeah. So anyway, look, I think ultimately, I'm sharing my own stuff. I'm sharing my own kind of views here, obviously, but I am, there's always an element of advocacy here, and if you're receptive, if you're picking up what I'm putting down, I am advocating that idea. Can you look at yourself naked? Because I think the outcome is, if you can, I think the outcome is you've a greater sense of what you're dealing with, yourself. And that, I believe that equips us to get on with stuff in a more functional way. It equips us to get on with stuff with a greater sense of personal well-being. And it sort of girds our loins to take on other challenges, and to take on those challenges that live just outside us, which is our other relationships, which is our, everything out there in the big bad world. And I mean, ultimately, I think we have to get on with it. We have to get out there and get on with facing those challenges. I don't think hiding ourselves away is a viable option, not on a long-term basis. There's a good life to be had, always. And I mean, this is my counsel to myself as well. There's a good life to be had. So, get your ass out the door and face it. It's going to, there are times when it may be more than you feel you can handle. But you will get there. You will get there. And you'll be better for the experience. And you'll be in your own power more. And, you know, you come back to that naked body. And I mean, I have this conversation with my daughter when I hear her making comments about bodies. She was very funny. Do you remember last year I was talking about Beyonce? I did an episode on Beyonce and Marilyn Monroe and the female form, and you know, putting it into a context of my wife's attitudes to those bodies and images, and to Beyonce and Marilyn Monroe, her concerns for how my daughter sees those, you know, iconic figures. And I was trying to kind of square it up in terms of the sort of clash of parenting styles, what each of us are comfortable with, and how we relay that stuff to our daughter. But just, I think it was just yesterday, it seems to come from nowhere. My daughter was talking about Beyonce and had this image in her head from last year when Beyonce was promoting a new album, where she was on this kind of, you know, diamante horse, you know, and clad in various bits of glitter and, you know, diamonds herself. And my daughter was talking about Beyonce's basketball-sized boobs. And I was like, I don't think they're the size of basketballs. But I was just saying, you know, that's one example. But I was just saying to my daughter, and you know, this is a recurring theme at the moment, I kind of go, look, they're just bodies. It's just a human body, and human bodies come in all shapes and sizes. And I try not to over interrogate her, but I just try to keep kind of planting that seed, like bodies are what they are, and to sort of, again, maybe plant some seeds of just body acceptance, body tolerance, body positivity in, you know, in her brain. So hopefully she'll travel that road relatively safely herself in the coming years. Okay, I think I'll leave it there. So yeah, embrace it. I mean, it is what it is. We are who we are. Look at that body. Look at yourself in different contexts. Or just tell me to shut up and put some clothes on. That's the other choice, isn't it? Okay, thanks for listening. I hope this took you somewhere. I hope it entertained, stimulated, diverted, amused, irritated. Do I want you to be irritated? I don't want to irritate you. But yeah, I hope it was a nice I hope it was a nice ride. To use an Irishism that might not be entirely appropriate. I will be back next week with something else. You can throw me love on social media. There will be links wherever you're listening to this. I'm there in all the usual places. So you can give me a shout out, leave a comment, leave a reaction. You can like, subscribe, rate. I believe that helps the profile of these podcasts. But yeah, whatever. Just if you're enjoying it, spread the word. And if you're really enjoying it and feel you can afford it, you can support me. Support this independent podcast on patreon.com/theclearout. And anything you choose to give would be greatly appreciated. If you can't afford it, don't worry about it. Just keep listening, keep enjoying, and I'll talk to you real soon. Okay, all the best. Take it easy. Mind yourselves. Bye.